Welcome to episode 5 of F That. Today, we are talking about narcissistic parenting and how to recognize it. Listen to me. There is an entire generation of narcissists roaming the earth right now, refusing to seek mental health treatment, and their children have paid the price. In this episode, we are going to uncover signs that you have a narcissistic parent and what you can do to protect yourself from their abuse moving forward. So let's get into it. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to recognize whether or not you have a narcissistic parent and some of their signs that show like, hey, I'm a narcissist, and what you can do to protect yourself from their abuse. And so there's probably a few things that you believe about your parent right now that is causing you to kind of gaslight yourself and tolerate their behavior. So let's talk about what some of those kind of common beliefs are. One thing that you might believe about your narcissistic parent right now is that this is how they've always been, so this is normal. And this might be your normal, but this is not normal, like regular normal. Just because they have always been that way does not mean that they get an excuse for their behavior. Just because this is how they've always treated you doesn't mean that that's okay. It doesn't mean that it's not doing any damage or it's not doing any harm. Okay. So that's something that you believe. It's like, oh, well, they've always been like this. Okay, boo, but that shit's not normal. So we got to let that go. You might also feel a sense of responsibility in taking care of them because they are so emotionally immature and they have groomed you to make them the center of your universe. So it's like, oh, I feel like I have to be there for my mom. I have to be there for my dad. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't owe them anything. It's like really important that you know that like child doesn't owe the parent anything at all. Nothing. My children don't owe me anything. They didn't ask to be here. Okay. And in the situation with me and my parent, I don't owe my parent anything. And so it's like, you shouldn't feel this sense of responsibility to take care of them just because they were so emotionally immature and got you thinking that they are your responsibility because they're not. You might also think that there's something wrong with you or that you're selfish somehow when you make any decision that would put yourself first, which, baby, baby, you have to put yourself first. Because if I can guess anything about you, your entire life so far has been wrapped around your parents and what it is that they want. And if you zoom out and you take a good look at your life, you might be like, wow, yeah, everything really has been about them up until this point. Not normal. Okay. And so what are the impacts, these things that you believe that, oh, well, this is how they've always been, so it's normal, or that I'm responsible for taking care of them, or that there's somehow something wrong with me for wanting to put myself first? Let's talk about the impact of those beliefs. You have a lot of unfounded guilt and shame surrounding every decision that you make. Every decision you make for yourself, you're like, oh God, I'm such a bad person if I put myself first. I feel so guilty for not, I set myself up a vacation to go somewhere by myself, but I didn't check in with my mom first. Babe, you're 40. Why are you checking in with her first? Why are you making sure it's okay with her first? Why are you making sure that she's taken care of before you check out? So much unfounded guilt, so much unfounded shame for wanting to do things for yourself. And that's not healthy for you. That is storing in your body as trauma. No bueno. You might also have this heavy weight of responsibility to take care of your parents, especially if they're in their elder years, even though that's the last thing that you want to do. And it's interesting. I live in California right now, and there's an entire generation of eldest daughters that are about to get railroaded because of these things called multifamily homes. So they're like ADUs. And they're basically like homes that have like 6 and 7 bedrooms and then attached in-law suite. And there's about to be so many eldest daughters out there that are about to just buy these big ass houses to move their parents in with them, even if they don't want their parents to live with them. And you just have this feeling of, well, they took care of me. Yeah, that was their job. You came out of her vagina. She is supposed to take care of you. That doesn't mean you owe them anything when they're older. That was their decision. That was a them problem. That is not a you problem. You have got to release yourself of that responsibility of like, oh, I owe them so much. Well, okay, That was their decision. And if your parents try to make you feel bad for decisions they made for themselves, that's a sign of a narcissist right there. And we'll talk about that later. Okay. You probably people please and self-sacrifice like crazy because you've been taught that this is what's necessary for people to love you, that love is conditional, that you're only good enough if you're constantly giving back to people, if you're constantly doing for other people, if you're constantly putting back into the world what you get out of it. You don't feel good enough. You feel inadequate. Inadequacy rules your life. You charge low prices in your business, or you never feel good enough to ask for a raise in your 9 to 5. You might struggle with abandonment because you believe that if you don't walk, talk, and act a certain way with friends or spouses or lovers or partners, that they're going to leave you because your narcissistic parents made you believe that you were responsible for their emotions and that if they weren't happy, you were no good. And so you always want to make sure that everybody else around you is happy because then that makes you feel good. And to put it nicely, your emotions are the only emotions that you are responsible for. Everybody else needs to be responsible for their own emotions. You are not responsible for other people's emotions. And if people try to make you responsible for their emotions by saying things like, oh, well, you made me yell when you said this. Bye. That's not a me problem. That's a you problem. Figure your shit out and then come to me when you've got that done. Right? So those are the ways that these beliefs that you have created or that have been instilled in you since before you were 7 years old have impacted you. And you might have physical health symptoms. You might have mental health symptoms. And you're like, why do I feel like shit? And it's like, because of who you're surrounding yourself with, babe. It's because who you're surrounding yourself with. The people you're surrounding yourself with are shit, namely your parents. Okay? Especially if your parents were boomers. Not all boomers are bad, but... So let's talk about ways to notice if you have a narcissistic parent. So you're like, is my parent a narcissist or are they just like selfish? And let's talk about the difference that kind of shows up. If they're just selfish, we all have selfish tendencies, right? We're all just like, I don't want to share my toys. But then there are people that we don't feel that way with. And narcissists feel that way with everybody. I feel more selfish when it comes to my narcissistic parents and sibling because I know that what they're trying to do is expected of me and I don't want to share my toys when it's expected of me. I'd rather just do it my damn self. So it's a difference between being selfish and it's like, if you owe everybody you're surrounding yourself with is like, I don't want to share my toys with you. It's like, because you're probably surrounded by narcissists who expect you to do certain things. Right? So you would feel a sense of like, I don't want to be around this person. And that's how you know that you've been around a narcissist before, because someone else's behavior is like triggering you and you're like, why are you making me mad? And it's because, oh, you've got narcissistic tendencies and your spidey senses are going off. So let's talk about some really specific things that narcissistic parents will do in order to make you feel bad. And these are kind of red flag for you for noticing and identifying whether your parents are actually narcissists or not. So they might say things like, I'm so sorry you feel that way when you ask for an apology. And I cannot emphasize enough how much that is not an apology. Okay. If somebody says, I'm sorry you feel that way, when it should have been, I'm sorry that I hurt you, or I'm sorry that my actions made you feel like you did something wrong, or they made you feel down. How can I make it right? Anything short of that is not a fucking apology. And the reason I recognize this is because my mom always sends me texts like this. I'm so sorry that you're feeling the way that you do. I wanted to give you space, but I'm heartbroken. Huh? Wait a minute. Pause. Did you just shift the conversation back to yourself? Because that's sign number 2. Narcissists will take a scenario and they'll they will gaslight you into believing that your feelings aren't valid because they or someone they know has had it so much worse. And so I noticed for like my mom, she would always change the conversation. I'd be like, Mom, I'm really struggling with this. And she'd be like, oh, well, so-and-so has been going through this too, and it's like so much worse for them, da 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 da. And I'd be like, are you trying to tell me that I'm not allowed to have a qualm? My mom would tell me that I like basically make me feel like I was wrong for hating my 9 to 5 because I made what she called to be bukus of money. But because I made so much money, I was supposed to be happy in my 9 to 5. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody listens to me here. People disrespect me left and right. And I work 10-hour days. I fucking hate it. But because she had to raise us in New York City being a teacher and a single parent, and she had it so much worse and she never had any money, I was supposed to be happy with what I was given because it was more than what she perceived that she had. The gaslighting would be so, so strong if you had a narcissistic parent. Nothing that you do is ever strong enough reason for them to feel bad for you. And it's not you, it's them. They are the worst. They might put their needs in front of your own. My mom had periodontal surgery about 2 years ago or so. And it was right during the time that I took mental health leave from work. And I told her, I said, Mom, I am going to take mental health leave from work. I'm really struggling right now. I just need to take time off. Instead of her first asking me how I was feeling, like, oh my God, are you okay? I didn't realize you were struggling so much. Like, what can I do? That's terrible. Like, like a typical parental response is supposed to be. The first thing she said was, how does that affect me? She wanted to know how my leave affected her. And I was like, is she fucking serious? So I was like, okay, whatever. So I told her, I said, I need you to not need me. I need you to not think that this is free time. Like all of a sudden I'm off from work so I can just go bounce around and do all these things with you. That's not what. And honestly, I didn't even want to tell her because I had a feeling she was going to try and abuse my time. But because she was watching my baby at the time, she was only 2, I felt like I had to loop her in. So I told her. And I told her, I said, please don't need me. She scheduled her periodontal surgery for the very first day that I was on leave after I asked her not to. And she was like, yeah, I need you to take me. And I was like, do you not have any other fucking friends that can do this? Since everybody else is busy. Okay, so am I. I told you, don't need me right now. And she was asking me like why I had a bad attitude that day. And I was like, because I told you I didn't want to be needed. And she put her needs in front of my own, in front of my requests, in front of what I needed. She made herself more important. And that being sucked. And that was like red flag number 875 for me. And speaking of her importance, narcissists will also overinflate their importance. They find themselves to be far more important than they actually are in any given moment. My mom has always wanted to be around the kids. She has always wanted to be in their lives nonstop, seeing them weekly because she didn't want to be forgotten about. We have pictures up around our house. If she wasn't within like 3 square feet in every picture, or like our screensavers on our TVs are just like rolling pictures. If she didn't see herself in like every other one, she'd be like, I'm heartbroken. Like, girl, this is on a shuffle. What you heartbroken about? It was frustrating because she needed to be important. She needed to be relevant. And that came from her own trauma, for her own past, or her own abandonment. And she was projecting that onto us through her narcissism of, I need to not be forgotten about. And I was like, that's not for me to worry about. Stop it. They might also offer to help you, but only if they're getting something in return, like money or praise or access to you. Everything that they offer to do for you, there's always something in it for them. It's never selfless. It's never just a sacrifice. And I'm never saying that you should be like that, but for them, it's always like that. That's always the reason why. And it's interesting because my mom always used to tell me the reason why you do something is just as important as why you're doing it, right? So the reason why you're doing it is just as important for like actually doing it. And it's so funny because she was showing me exactly who she was in that moment when she was telling me that, and I couldn't see it. And it was like, for her, it was always about being important. It was always about being the center of attention. It was always about overinflating her importance and how relevant she was. She could not be forgotten about. There's always had to be something in it for her, or it wasn't worth it to her. And then the last thing you might notice if you are thinking you have a narcissistic parent is they make you feel bad for the exact shit that they're doing. My mom, like most parents, was addicted to coffee. And one year for Lent, she gave up coffee for 40 days and 40 nights, and she never went back. And she glorified the shit out of herself for that. But all she did was switch from coffee to Diet Coke, which has just as much caffeine in it. But she's always talked about how great she is because she never went back to coffee. In 2021, I got a tummy tuck 9 months after I had my third child because your bitch was tired of having a flabby tummy. And I was tired of having an unhealed core from having really big babies. And so that summer, I was feeling myself because I had the snatched waist and the plump peach. Like I was feeling myself. So I bought a bunch of activewear. And I was staying at my mom's house that summer before we moved out west. And after like the third or fourth package showed up, she was like, you have an addiction, right? And I was like, bitch, what? My mom had always envied me for not having addictions the way that she did. So the first sign of it, she was like, oh, you've got an addiction. She like ran with it. And I was like, okay. And they will make you feel bad and they'll make you feel like shit for the exact things that they're doing. Any way to get one up on you, any way to make you feel inferior, any way to make you feel as poorly as they feel about themselves. So I've told you a lot of stories so far about my mom and realizing that she was a narcissist. But this whole journey started about 18 months ago, realizing that she was a narcissist because she was very covert about it, unlike my dad, who it was very obvious with. Like his entire world revolves around him. And you can't even deny that. You meet the man and every single second is about him. But my mom was always offering to help people. And she was always offering to do things for people, which is why other people don't notice it. Because when they're benefiting directly from her help, they don't see what it is that's happening in front of their eyes. But it wasn't until I got like a bird's eye view of what she was doing, like took a really big step back, did I notice and start to identify like, yo, she's like really a narcissist. Not to mention there was a lot of pain that went into identifying her like this because calling somebody a narcissist, I feel like in our society is equivalent to calling them a serial killer. Like it hits just as hard. It hits just as bad. And so there was this level of guilt that I felt, right, for identifying her like this. But I was like, this is necessary for me to make amends and to figure this out for myself. So I had to run with it with that label. But I realized that there was always complaining about how people weren't treating her right. She was always upset that she never won Teacher of the Year. And it was interesting. It wasn't until I started noticing like her Facebook posts and like she would write run-on sentences and things like that. And I'm like, is she really that good of a teacher? Like, is she really that good at this? And I'm like, I started to really like, I don't think people were doing you wrong. I really just don't think that you're as good at this as you think you are. Which again goes back to the overinflation of self. But again, I had to take a step back and be like, wait, something's not right here. There was always an entitlement to my money, especially when I joined the Army. When I joined the Army and went active duty, I was making more than she was, and I was 19 years old. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, what kind of money do you have? Mind you, I joined the military because I didn't want her to have to pay for me to go to college because I felt a responsibility to save her wallet. I was like, oh, you can't take on this kind of debt for me. You've already sacrificed so much for me. So I'll just go to the Army and kill my body and get PTSD for you to avoid student loans, because she also made me extremely afraid of having debt. And so then when I started making money, it was like, okay, not only did you save me from having to take out college loans for you and put my name on them, which she gladly did for my brother, but then it was like, when are you taking us to dinner? When are you buying me this? She expected lavish gifts. She expected me to pay for so many things. And it was like, why? I don't owe you anything. She would always offer to watch my kids so my husband and I could get a weekend away together. But she would always ask for a bunch of money to watch them. Because I'd be like, why can't you just stay at the house with them? And she'd be like, no, I want to take them here. I want to take them there. And they're your kids. So you have to pay for this. And I'd be like, bitch, what? Or if I asked her to watch them so I could go out with friends, she'd be like, no, why wasn't I invited out with your friends? And she'd be trying to be one of my little friends. And I'm like, because you're not my friend. You're my mom. That's it. And mostly because I felt strangled by her presence. It was why we asked her not to move out west with us, because we knew that she would want to just be my friend. I'd be the only person she knew, and she'd want to spend every waking hour with me. And it was exhausting for me. It was a lot. Just a lot of emotional immaturity on her part. And that kind of sucked. So what was the turning point for me? And for me, it was a number of points. It was a number of red flags that went off across time, but there were a few in particular that kind of stuck out to me. And it was like, I tried to talk with her about how her behavior was affecting our relationship. And she would listen, and then she would noticeably make changes for a few weeks. Like, you could tell that she was going out of her way to not do the thing anymore. And then she would ask me if she was doing a good job. She'd be like, well, have you noticed? Am I doing better? But not in a way to get feedback, but in a way to get praise, so that I could be like, yeah, mom, you're doing so great. I'm so proud of you. Da, 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 da. Like, essentially treating me like the parent. Like, am I doing a good job? She would even do things like turn and like put her hands out and be like, have you noticed? What have you noticed about me? What have I changed? What have I been doing right? And I'd be like, is she serious? Is she serious? And that was tough, because it just, she wasn't changing to actually change. She was changing to get praise. That's insane. Then a year later, after our relationship had deteriorated even more, I sent her an itemized list of why our relationship had deteriorated. And I did so after talking to my therapist, like, why is this important to you? And I'm like, I need to get it out of my body. And every person who has a narcissistic parent goes through this time. They go through this cycle of, if I just told them the way that they hurt me, if they just heard me out, maybe they will change. Maybe they will listen. And we always get let down. But we have to go through that and see that for ourselves, because we have to have that hope. And so this was for me. I sent her an itemized list of everything that had gotten us to this point. And all she talks about in her response was how hurt she was in those exact moments. So she basically, again, took my feelings, deteriorated them, and was like, this is why I'm more important than you in this moment. God, this is such a heavy fucking topic. Because why? No apology, no sense of responsibility for how she hurt me. Just, I hear what you're saying and I raise you my feelings. Narcissists are one-uppers. They are people that have to have the last word. They are more important. Everything that they're going through is so much worse. And yes, this is a trauma response to their childhood trauma, but that doesn't give them a free pass to treat other people like shit. And so I knew that if I ever wanted to feel differently about myself, I was going to have to move first. And we've talked about this in previous episodes. And it's like, you have to move first. I wanted to show the universe that I was a match for better than this, that I deserved more than this. So I had to make a move first. And so what is available to you? What was available for me when I decided to make that move first and, sever that tie? And it's like mutually beneficial and loving relationships. I have friendships that I've dreamed about. Planning vacations with families that I love and adore, planning couples things with people that I adore. That's what's available to me now, because the universe was like, I see you, babe. You do deserve more. Thank you for making that tie. Here's what you've been asking for. Your health is available to you. I had brain fog, and I'm going to go into more of that in episode 10, my aha moment. But it's like my health. I had brain fog for a year and a half that didn't start clearing really until I started recording this podcast. That came over me one of the last times I saw my mom in person. That's not a coincidence. And now I have so much of my health back because I'm not dealing with people like that anymore, because I made the decision to move first. And wealth is available to you. Everything that your parents make you feel bad for is available to you. When I was trying to start my business, I didn't feel like I could speak freely about my hurt and my pain without wondering whether or not she would hear it or how she would feel about it. And I'm a self-projected projector. I must speak in order to get clarity. And I was bottling so much of that inside of me because I was so worried about her emotions. But when I was done worrying about how she felt about things, that was what allowed me to shift my business into helping daughters and eldest daughters heal from the same pain that I was dealing with, which allowed me to create the mastermind that I have now, which has enrolled upwards of 10 women by the time you hear this podcast in only 6 months' time. And I've had my biggest sales year yet in business from enrolling women into this program because I wasn't afraid and I wasn't trying to step around my mom's feelings anymore. And no, I did not create wealth off of hurting someone else because I've never mentioned her name. I've never thrown her specific name under the rug. I only have ever talked about my experience and helped other women feel seen in their pain, in their struggle, and help them through to the other side like I helped myself. Ain't nothing wrong with that. So how can we avoid the abuse of narcissistic parents in the future? And so my answer for you here is to start the way that I always tell you to start, which is creating and maintaining thick mommy boundaries, which we talked about in episode 2. So I always want you to ask yourself, is tolerating your parents' disrespect something that supports the future and most abundant version of yourself? If the answer is no, then you don't fucking do it. You let them go. Is future you tolerating this disrespect? If she is, then you continue to do that. But I tell you what, the most abundant version of yourself is not tolerating this disrespect. And if you care about the most abundant version of yourself and you want the most abundant version of yourself to show up for you as quickly as it has for me, you got to cut them off. Be clear with your parents, or don't tell them at all about the things that are going to shift in your relationship. You can tell them, but all they're going to do is send you on another fucking guilt trip. So keep it to yourself, or tell them, say, hey, this is how things are shifting. I'm not taking questions on it at this time. You'll get a letter in the mail. Whichever you choose, stand firm in that. Don't waver in it, as hard as it's going to be. And if you need support with that, I created an entire class on boundaries, which is part of my Worthy membership, which we mentioned during the commercial break. And you can find the link to sign up for that in the show notes. This is an impeccable class on my 3-step process for how to set boundaries and all the questions that came with that during that live class. And lastly, I want you to increase your focus on self-love here. Narcissistic parents are counting on your insecurities to remain relevant. And this is your story, babe. So feel free to hit them with a plot twist anytime and be like, nah, bish, I love myself too much to tolerate your bullshit. Because that's exactly what it is. It's fucking bullshit. Okay? Create those boundaries, maintain them, stand firm, get a community like I have inside of Worthy to support you during this transition, because it's not easy in a place that you're starting from. You're probably feeling so much guilt around even sitting here listening to this podcast. Like, oh my God, what if my mom hears me listening to this? And as irrational as that sounds, that's what you're feeling. Get yourself a support group like I have inside of Worthy to help you with this. Okay? Because you deserve the abundance. You deserve the wealth. You deserve that most abundant version of yourself that you cannot access right now because you're a vibrational match for disrespect. Make this the moment that you decide to change and you decide to move. You are worthy of so much more than you've allowed yourself to have with your narcissistic parents. Okay? You are worthy. You are valued. Go find people that will value you. Allow the universe to send people to you that will value you, will value your words, will value your feelings, will value helping you get to the bag, because it is about the money. So now, like we do at the end of every episode, I'm going to give you 2 prompt questions to think about, to go over in your mind. It's probably our longest episode ever, which is so good because it's such a good topic. We needed to talk about this. Okay. And you can find these prompts in the show notes at the website, and the link will be in the episode description. Okay. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, what am I irrationally afraid to lose by cutting my parents off? What am I irrationally afraid to lose by cutting my parents off? Because you're afraid to lose something. You're afraid to lose the affection that actually isn't there. You're afraid to lose love that actually isn't there, just what you've made yourself believe was there. You're afraid of missing people that you thought they were, not who they actually are. What are you actually afraid to lose? And then the second question I want you to ask yourself is, what would I be doing differently if I removed them from my life? And why don't I feel worthy of having that? What would I be doing differently if I removed them from my life? And why don't I feel worthy of having that? Wow. This was a heavy hitting episode. And you can tell that it's so near and dear to my heart because of how long we talked. Okay. I want you to remember that it's not you. It is them. I know a lot of times we, again, gaslight ourselves into believing that there's something wrong with us. And because we're so heavily introspective, that's why we feel bad. But it is them. You've done everything. And this is not your fight to fight anymore. This is not your battle. This is not your work. You've got so many bigger and better things to do. And you dealing with narcissistic parents is keeping you from your destiny. It's keeping you from your big vision. It's keeping you from the boldness that you desire for your life. It's keeping you from your money. Let it go. There's so much more available out there to you. You just have to believe you're worthy of having it. Okay. If you are looking for more in-depth support with moving past the relationship with your narcissistic parents, getting over this guilt and the shame that you feel for choosing yourself, which I know so many of you are feeling right now, having these conflicting emotions, make sure you go to thefccoach.com and check out my program, Worthy, which is linked in the show notes. And the show notes is in the description. I want to help you through this. I want you to have a community that can help pull you through this, and you can get to the other side knowing that you made the correct decision for yourself. And in episode 6, we're going to be talking about dragging your trauma into your business. So much of the trauma that you have developed from your narcissistic parents is showing up inside of your business. And you might think that you are fully healed and standing in your power, but your business suggests otherwise. And that is what we're going to talk about in episode 6. So I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, make sure that you rate it, share it, download it, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.